world of AI, even casually, it feels like drinking from a fire hose right now.
Totally. New tools, new research,
Mm.
intense debates. It's a lot.
And we've taken a stack of conversations and notes straight from people right in the thick of it, builders, practitioners, folks exploring what AI can actually do.
That's right. It's like a direct line into the pulse of the AI community. You see the cutting edge stuff people are finding, but also the really serious questions about impact and governance.
And our mission in this deep dive is basically to sift through this specific stack of insights, pull out the most important nuggets, and, connect the dots for you, our listener.
Think of it as your shortcut, understanding what's really hitting home and what challenges are top of mind right now.
We'll explore some of the latest AI tools people are excited about, how they're being used for building, creating.
And then we'll zoom out a bit to those crucial conversations around AI safety, ethics, and the whole global regulatory landscape, which is changing fast.
Exactly. It's everything from digging into specific platforms like Perplexity Labs, comparing models, all the way to grappling with the big kind of messy questions of compliance and what that means for different industries.
So yeah, let's jump in with something that's been generating a lot of buzz in the sources. Perplexity Labs.
Yes, Labs definitely seems to be a standout. What are people highlighting about its capabilities? What's the main thing?
What's fascinating here, and what comes through loud and clear, is that users aren't just talking about getting answers anymore, not just text.
Okay.
With Labs, the focus is shifting to its ability to create, well, artifacts.
Artifacts? What kind of artifacts?
We're talking comprehensive studies, detailed reports, sure, but crucially, also things like visualizations, dashboards, and even interactive outputs based on HTML.
Ah, that interactive element. That feels like a pretty significant shift, doesn't it?
It really does.
How does that compare to, say, Perplexity's existing deep research function? Did that come up?
Yeah, that comparison did come up in the sources, and it really highlights the key difference.
Yeah.
Deep research is designed to get you a comprehensive answer relatively quickly, right?
Right. Faster turnaround.
Labs, on the other hand, is described as taking more time, and that's because it's actively doing things in the background.
Doing things? Like what?
It uses multiple tools, like writing and executing code or using headless browsing, which basically lets it interact with websites like a person would.
Okay.
To create these dynamic interactive results.
Yeah.
It's moving beyond just presenting information to actually building something with the information.
Got it. And embedded in that capability is this concept called code act. What does that mean in practice?
So code act, as users are describing it, is the ability for the AI not just to write code, but to actually run that code.
Run it.
Yes, and maybe even more interestingly, generate prompts for itself based on the results of that code.
Wow. Okay.
It's sort of building on that react pattern, reason and act. This is what allows it to dynamically process data and build those interactive outputs instead of just, spitting out a static report.
That seems incredibly powerful. So with capabilities like that, what's the overall vibe from users in the sources? Are they actually getting value from it?
Oh, the reactions are overwhelmingly positive, almost bordering on disbelief sometimes.
Really?
Yeah, game changer, mind-blowing, insane. These are the kinds of words popping up again and again.
Uh-huh.
One user felt it made their lectures 10x better because they could generate visualizations on the fly. What really stood out, too, was this ability to get amazing results even when public data is scarce.
Like what? Any examples?
Like someone generating a detailed report on technophobia in Mexico where you wouldn't expect tons of easily accessible data. It's seen as hugely useful for product research, digging into business data revenue, sales funnels, CX, even HR attendance data.
Any other specific, concrete examples of things people actually built with it?
Yes, there was a great one. A user who built a training volume and forecast calculator for their job in under 10 minutes.
Wow.
Yeah, replacing something that apparently used to take weeks in Excel. Another one successfully used it on the classic Boston housing dataset to create an ML model, complete with explainability.
Okay.
And there's significant excitement, particularly mentioned around its potential for financial analysis and visualization in fintech.
So if you build something interactive like that, how do you share it? Or actually use it outside the Perplexity platform?
The sources confirmed that generated apps have a direct link you can just share. Simple enough.
Okay.
And for more control, you can actually download the raw HTML, CSS, and JavaScript.
Ah, so you own the code.
Essentially, yeah. Which means you can host it yourself, put it on your own website, or use something like GitHub Pages.
Right.
There was a little note of uncertainty in the sources, though, about exactly how long Perplexity itself will directly host these dynamic outputs. That wasn't totally clear.
Okay, so clearly a lot of potential and excitement, but, with any new tool, there are often kinks to work out. Did the sources highlight any limitations or issues?
Yes, absolutely. It's not a magic bullet just yet. Users noted that while it generates dashboards, for instance, they aren't always perfect straight away. They might need some tweaking.
Makes sense.
One specific attempt to build an interactive market trend analysis dashboard reportedly failed. So it's not foolproof.
Any other limitations?
There was also a mention that labs might currently have limitations on the size of data it can handle effectively. Someone mentioned an instance where a large dataset upload worked fine in another tool, but didn't succeed in Perplexity.
Right, early days perhaps on handling really big data.
Could be. It's a rapidly evolving space after all.
Definitely. So Labs is generating a lot of excitement, clearly, but the sources cover a much wider AI landscape than just that. Let's maybe zoom out a bit and look at the discussions comparing different AI tools and models.
Absolutely. The conversations definitely weren't just about Perplexity. Users are actively weighing in on, say, Gemini Deep Search versus ChatGPT.
Oh, yeah. What's the take there?
Well, some preferred Gemini, specifically calling out its research transparency and the quality of the sources it cites. That seemed important to them.
There seems to be a feeling maybe that Google is really pushing hard to catch up or get ahead again.
That definitely comes through in the discussions. One user observed that Google started behind but is clearly pushing to get back out in front now with the Gemini models.
But is it seen as true innovation?
Well, there's also a contrasting sentiment. Someone suggested Google might be more of a UX and execution master, great at polishing and presenting things, rather than a pure innovation master breaking entirely new ground.
Interesting distinction.
Yeah, and one user even mentioned canceling their Gemini subscription after comparing it, so, mixed feedback.
And what about other major models, like Claude? Any chatter about that?
Claude was mentioned. It was described as having a different orientation. Some users found it particularly strong for coding tasks.
Coding, okay.
Yeah, often used alongside other dedicated coding tools, it seems.
Speaking of coding and building, what other specific tools came up in these conversations for that kind of work?
Beyond Claude, Cursor was mentioned. That's an AI coding tool some users found helpful.
Right.
Manus.ai also came up. It was noted particularly for handling smaller coding tasks and sentiment analysis. It was seen as maybe a good option before Labs really came onto the scene with its more advanced capabilities.
I see. Any others?
Other names thrown around included Flowith and Hero UI, especially in the context of rapid prototyping.
And there's this term that caught my eye, vibe coding. What exactly is that about?
Yeah.
It sounds fun.
It does, yeah. Vibe coding seems to be the community's term for using platforms like Bolt, Lovable, Veo.dev, and Stitch.
Okay.
The whole idea is super rapid building, often for quickly knocking out proof of concepts or demos. Get something working fast.
Speed is the key.
Exactly. There was even discussion around a Bolt hackathon specifically focused on this fast-paced style of building.
So what's the user experience like with these vibe coding tools? What are the pros and cons people mention?
Well, the big pro is speed. People found them great for creating and deploying something very quickly, especially useful in those hackathon settings where time is everything and you might get tool credits.
Makes sense. Any downsides?
The reported limitations included challenges with code portability. If you export the code, it can apparently be tricky to modify it outside the platform.
Lock-in potential.
A bit, yeah. And also, if you use their integrated databases, you're kind of tied to that platform for your data.
Right.
And a very practical note that came up. You often have to go back and manually replace all the dummy images the AI puts into your designs.
Huh. Okay. Good to know. So we've covered coding, building. What about content creation, like video and audio generation?
Yeah, that came up too. For marketing videos, Synthesia was mentioned. It's a paid tool, offers multiple languages, custom avatars, that sort of thing. Cam AI was highlighted specifically for transforming existing videos into multiple languages. Its lip sync matching capability got a special shout out. It seems people were impressed by that.
That's cool. Audio.
For audio, 11 Labs came up, seen as potentially useful for things like advertisements. And someone recalled a past promo they had for free access.
Right.
But a key insight across these graphic and audio AIs was that getting good results really depends on mastering your prompts. It's not just magic.
Prompt engineering is crucial there too, huh?
Definitely. Users specifically noted the difficulty in generating very specific visual requirements, things like getting hands right or capturing particular emotional expressions accurately. Still a challenge.
Yeah, the infamous AI hands problem. Okay, what about analyzing unstructured data, like, say, feedback from interviews?
Sentiment analysis was discussed for exactly that kind of task. Roberta and Julius were suggested tools.
Julius.
Yeah, Julius was noted particularly for its ability to actually provide the Python code it used for the analysis, which is helpful. And as we mentioned earlier, Modest was also seen as a solid option for this kind of thing, especially before the more advanced capabilities of labs became widely available.
Got it. Any discussion around automating workflows with AI? Connecting different tools?
Yes, workflow automation definitely came up. Mentions of NEN and Make.com.
Okay, standard players there.
Right. And there was even a specific little anecdote shared about troubleshooting a bug in NEN where a webhook was triggering twice. Someone even shared a link to the solution they found. Real practical stuff.
Nice. Community helping community. What about running models closer to home, like locally or self-hosted? Was that discussed?
It was. Running AI models locally was part of the conversation. There was a mention of the Google AI Edge Gallery app, though it was pointed out that it's still an experimental alpha release.
Okay, so early days for that specific one.
Yeah, but the concept of self-hosted models, like Llama, came up as particularly relevant for regulated industries.
For compliance reasons.
Exactly. For companies needing really strict data containment and compliance, like PCI compliance, for handling payment info running models within their own environment, or maybe a secure private cloud was seen as pretty crucial.
Right, keeping that sensitive data locked down.
And that whole discussion around regulated industries and data containment naturally leads us into, well, a really crucial thread running through all these sources. The big picture conversation about AI governance, ethics, and safety.
Yeah, this seems to be a major topic bubbling up, and the sources specifically mention a focus on the EU AI Act.
It's definitely a key area of interest for the community, or at least this segment reflected in the sources. The EU AI Act sparked a lot of discussion, particularly within a governance-focused group.
What aspects were they digging into?
People were drilling down into the specifics. Compliance obligations, how it impacts startups versus established players, the requirements for providers and deployers of AI systems, and that whole framework for classifying AI systems based on risk level, high risk, low risk, etc.
Right. How do the discussions in the sources seem to compare the EU AI Act to other global approaches? Is it seen as the main one?
It's consistently presented as, the most comprehensive framework discussed. It's legally binding, which is key.
Okay.
And it uses that risk-based approach, focusing heavily on potential harm. It includes pretty detailed requirements, especially for anything deemed high risk, and it seems to have strong enforcement mechanisms planned.
What about Japan's approach? That was mentioned too, right? It seemed quite different.
Very different. Japan recently introduced its own AI guidelines, and the description highlighted a very distinct cultural approach.
How so?
Instead of relying mainly on heavy financial penalties for noncompliance with copyright and responsible AI guidelines, they're apparently using a name and shame strategy.
Name and shame.
Yeah. The idea is that publicly calling out companies that don't comply will damage their reputation. And in the Japanese cultural context, that's seen as a highly effective, maybe even more effective consequence than just fines.
Fascinating. And is there a unified federal approach in the U.S. according to these sources, or is it more fragmented?
Based on these discussions, there isn't a single overarching federal AI law in the U.S. like the EU's Act. It seems much more fragmented.
Okay.
There was a report mentioned about a potential state-level moratorium, possibly proposed by former President Trump for like 10 years. The stated intention, reportedly, was to prioritize innovation over regulation during that period.
So a very different philosophy there.
Seems so, yeah. Highlights the contrasting regulatory landscapes.
And there was also mention of a broader global framework from the UN.
Yes, the UN has proposed a global framework, but it's important to note it's principles-based and legally non-binding.
So more aspirational.
Kind of. It focuses on encouraging countries to protect human rights, safeguard data, monitor risks, cooperate internationally, but it largely leaves the specific rules and, crucially, the enforcement to individual nations.
So, if you're trying to navigate this landscape, maybe you're operating globally or handling sensitive data, what guidance can you sort of pull from these discussions? What's the takeaway?
The general sense is that the best framework really depends on your specific context, right?
Yeah.
Are you focused just on the U.S. market? Are you a global enterprise? Is your main worry compliance? Or is it speed to innovation?
Right, different priorities.
Exactly. The EU Act gets highlighted for its comprehensiveness and because it's legally binding. So if you're, say, a U.S. company already thinking about GDPR compliance for your European users,
Yeah.
then the EU AI Act becomes particularly relevant because it is legally binding and much more detailed than that more aspirational UN framework. It has teeth.
Got it. And stepping into the more practical challenges, what specific concerns or potential pitfalls are being raised about the AI systems themselves, like bias?
Bias is definitely a significant concern that came up. There was a concrete example discussed involving skin filtering, the kind intended to detect nudity. The concern was that because a bias is baked into the training data, these filters could potentially result in more false positives with darker skin tones.
Ah, okay. That's a serious issue.
Yeah. And it led to a discussion questioning whether maybe filters should first try to identify if a person is even present before analyzing skin tones. A different approach.
Interesting. What about other filtering issues, like censorship?
Filtering and censorship issues also came up quite a bit. Users shared frustrations about automated filters just deleting messages or content inappropriately,
Like what?
like a post detailing genuine pain points from an enterprise pilot getting flagged and removed.
Yeah.
The feeling was these filters were often just keyword-based, not context-aware.
Right, like flagging the word explode, even if it's used harmlessly.
Exactly that kind of thing. It drew parallels to frustrating experiences people remembered with old firewall systems that would just block content with no clear reason or logic, as someone put it.
There seems to be some skepticism, maybe, about how seriously the big tech companies prioritize safety and ethics in practice, despite the talk.
That sentiment was definitely present in some of the discussions, yeah. Users shared experiences that left them feeling that maybe some big tech companies focus more on talking about safety and ethics than truly implementing robust solutions.
How so?
Citing experiences, for example, with ethics leads who they felt were deflecting tough questions, or the use of what seemed like heavily media-trained governance professionals. Someone even mentioned that old saying about elephants' teeth.
Oh, yeah.
The ones you see aren't always the ones they actually chew with, implying a gap between the public face and the internal reality.
Right. And this becomes particularly critical for industries dealing with highly sensitive data, doesn't it? Like finance or law.
Absolutely. The conversations around building AI co-pilots for tasks involving super sensitive data, things like negotiating legal documents or potentially handling patient data, were very active.
And what's the consensus there? Use big foundation models or something else?
There's a clear preference expressed in these sources for using self-hosted models like Llama, often run within secure environments like AWS Bedrock,
Why is that?
because they offer better data containment. They're seen as more suitable for strict compliance needs like PCI compared to relying on external foundation models from providers like ChatGPT, Google, or Azure.
What are the specific concerns with using those big external foundation models for sensitive stuff?
The key concerns raised were things like potential liability if there's a data leak, and also the risk of the provider changing their terms of service down the line.
Even if they claim user data isn't used for training.
Right, there's still a trust factor and a risk assessment involved. It was noted, though, that despite these concerns, some law firms are apparently still building on foundation models. Others are prioritizing that self-contained approach for their most sensitive use cases. It's not uniform.
So different risk appetites, perhaps.
It seems like it. The sources also detailed some of the factors that go into pricing LLM solutions for businesses, the usual suspects. Tokens consumed, overall volume of use, the infrastructure required, any fees for third-party services, the potentially significant cost of fine-tuning a model, plus ongoing development and maintenance. It adds up.
Yeah, definitely not free. And is intellectual property IP a concern with all this sharing and building happening within communities?
IP concerns did come up, but specifically in the context of sharing community-created session videos, say on platforms like YouTube.
Okay.
The clarification drawn from the sources was essentially that content created by members or from sessions that don't directly utilize a specific tool like Perplexity itself likely don't pose an IP risk to that specific tool provider.
Ah, the risk is elsewhere.
Yeah, the concern would typically be more with the content creator themselves or the platform they're using, not necessarily the AI tool that might have been discussed in a separate context.
Got it. Okay, so moving beyond the sort of technical deep dives and the regulatory frameworks, the sources also offer some broader reflections. They really give you a sense of the community's pulse, the human side of all this.
Yes, absolutely. You get insights into potential societal impacts people are thinking about. Concerns were raised about AI potentially encouraging antisocial behavior, for
Oh,
example,
so?
or maybe leading towards a kind of conformity, turning people into sheep with similar views and thoughts, with someone drawing parallels to patterns already observed on social media platforms.
A familiar worry.
Yeah. But on the flip side, there were counterpoints mentioning the push within the field to prioritize safety measures and ethics, even if, as we discussed, there's some skepticism about how effectively that's always being done in practice.
One particularly interesting, maybe surprising use case that emerged was around AI and companionship.
That definitely caught my attention too. People are experimenting with creating virtual companions.
Like chatbots.
Yeah, but maybe more specific. One example was someone who created a virtual husband, but designed it specifically to argue back.
To argue back. Why?
The user explained they use this virtual companion for venting frustrations and getting arguments out of their system, which they felt actually helped them have more constructive conversations with their actual partner later.
Huh. That's unexpected.
It is.
Okay.
It brings to mind a quote that was shared apparently from a Duke University professor, noting that while human friends are obviously the best solution for loneliness, robots could potentially serve as a temporary solution for those who currently have no one. A stopgap, maybe?
Interesting perspective. And on the topic of human roles, there was a pretty provocative discussion about business optimization right up at the executive level.
Right, that debate sparked by someone asking about the value of a CXO, a chief experience officer, or similar role if their primary responsibility essentially becomes just summarizing the work their team is doing.
And the idea was,
The idea floated was that AI tools, maybe functioning as a kind of AI chief of staff, could potentially handle that summary role pretty effectively.
which raises questions.
Exactly. Questions about whether that frees up the human CXO for higher-level strategic tasks, or, potentially, whether that role itself could even become obsolete in some cases. Food for thought.
Definitely. Another unique discussion point that came up was the concept of time banking. What was that about?
Time banking came up specifically in the context of potentially using it for elderly companionship, a system where people exchange time credits for giving and receiving care or companionship.
Okay, sounds potentially nice.
But based on a past experiment someone shared from the sources, significant friction points were revealed. The core issue was using time as the sole unit of value.
What's wrong with that?
It didn't account for speed or efficiency or competence. It felt unfair, apparently, that a beginner taking, say, hours on a task might be valued the same in time credits as an expert completing it skillfully in just minutes.
Ah, I see the problem. So the insight gained was that just measuring time isn't always enough.
Exactly. It highlighted the need for maybe different parameters beyond just time spent, or perhaps focusing time banking only on domains where expertise differences don't create that kind of imbalance.
Like what?
Like, the example given was providing undivided love in companionship, where the value is the time spent being present, not how efficiently you do it.
Makes sense. And you also get a real sense of the community's collaborative energy from these sources, don't you?
Absolutely. That fellowship map hobby project someone mentioned was a great example. People just coming together to build something and learn collaboratively.
Yeah.
There's genuine excitement around community contributions. You see phrases like awesome community popping up frequently. People are actively sharing resources, GitHub links, LinkedIn posts, articles, tutorials, courses, info about hackathons.
It sounds very active.
Very. It was even noted that the community seems to be growing so fast, it's actually becoming a challenge for members to keep up with everything that's being shared. A good problem to have, maybe.
Huh, yeah. And it's not all super serious technical stuff or heavy ethics debates either. There are those little quirks and moments of humor sprinkled in that keep it human.
Totally.
That's
Like the very relatable frustration someone shared about the Perplexity Labs timer saying 5 mins remaining for like the past 5 minutes.
been there.
Right. Someone compared it to waiting for a food delivery app timer.
Mm.
Or that funny anecdote about a truly terrible Bollywood subtitle example, apparently due to poor AI translation.
Oh, dear.
And that appreciative comment someone made, referring to another member's broad knowledge by calling them a Mrs. Polymath. Little moments like that.
It really paints a picture, doesn't it?
Yeah.
A dynamic community grappling with the absolute bleeding edge of AI, facing both these incredible possibilities and some really complex challenges.
It really does. They're pushing the boundaries of the tools, they're navigating these tricky ethical and regulatory waters, and they're doing it while building cool projects and supporting each other.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into these particular sources, we've explored the rapid advancements in AI capabilities users are finding, especially highlighting things like Codact in Perplexity Labs and the emergence of vibe coding.
We've navigated the diverse landscape of AI tools for different tasks, and we've seen the varied, sometimes conflicting global approaches to AI governance, from the comprehensive EU Act and Japan's unique name and shame method to the less unified US landscape and that aspirational UN framework.
And we've touched on those crucial ongoing debates about AI's potential societal impact, surprising uses like AI companionship, and the very real, practical challenges faced by people actually building AI systems, particularly in regulated industries dealing with sensitive data.
And understanding these points, pulled directly from the experiences and discussions shared in these sources, really gives you, our listener, a shortcut, a way to be well-informed quickly. You can start spotting the patterns, appreciating the nuances.
Seeing where the friction points are.
Exactly. And seeing where the breakthroughs are happening in this incredibly fast-moving field.
It really makes you pause and think about the layers of trust involved in using these powerful tools. Given the varied global approaches to governance we talked about, the practical challenges of ensuring safety and compliance, especially with sensitive data, and the potential risks versus the claims made by the providers of these big foundation models that the sources discuss, it leaves you wondering, what level of trust can you truly place in AI models and the claims made by their providers?